Good day, good people. This is Brad King, and you are listening to the Downtown Writers Jam podcast, which is now part of the Solid Listen Network, which we'll be talking about in just a little bit. This is the announcement that I've been alluding to over the past few shows. Before we get to all of that stuff, today we have Nikki Smith, whose book is All in Her Head. And in between the time I've done the interview and now, I've started reading the book, and it is fantastic. But also I've realized a thing, that over the last few months, I've interviewed a lot of people that have written thrillers, and people have dark imaginations. I have a lot of people on this show with really dark imaginations. The book is great. Can't wait to finish it, and I can't wait for you to hear this interview. She's lovely. She's fascinating. Her story about how she got the novel published is great, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. Before we get started with all the stuff, as part of the new partnership in the Solid Listen podcast network, you'll notice we have new music all over the place now. We have new branding. All of that was done by my creative director, Stephanie Warren, who's been working really hard on this stuff, and it's great. It's fabulous. It is... When you work with somebody when you work with a designer, I've worked with designers most of my life, and one of the really great parts of that, when you work with somebody who you know sort of gets it, is you describe what you want, and then they give you something completely different, which is the thing that you want, which is what all of this stuff is. I give really weird instructions, like, I want it to be jazzy, and it should look like an old, jazz club, and I want there to be smoke, and I want it to be clean, and it should look like Apple, like things that have nothing to do with anything. And what you see is the new branding, which I love and is great. And we'll be continuing to evolve that a little bit with some different aspects of what we're doing as we move forward. We have the whole new website, and there you can find all of our happy hours. We have Louise Fine coming up. We have Allison Wood coming up. All those tickets are free. Space is limited, so you can go to thewritersjam.com and sign up for that. The newsletter's there. The bookshop is there. You can buy books, all of the stuff. So it's really exciting, that particular part of where we're at. And we got here in a really interesting way. So I started this show a long time ago at Wired, 20 years ago. And I did it with my producer, who has since passed away, Jeremy. And we had this studio in the back of Wired, and nobody really used it. And my boss, George Shirk, was like, we should do something with that. And he wanted me to do a news show. So, we did this daily news show that was dumb, and I wrote it, and it was terrible, and I hated doing it. Jeremy hated producing it. And we said, man, we should do an interview show, because that's what I do best, what I like doing. It's what I do best. I have a good time doing that. But I didn't want to do any technology stuff. I accidentally fell into Wired. That's a whole different story. So we went back and just started emailing folks. And we got Scott Bakula before Enterprise came out. And Grandmaster Flash was one of my first people. We had Chuck D, had a bunch of writers, had George Carlin, whose show is up. And we did it, and we kind of posted it, and nobody really told us to stop. Nobody gave us any feedback about anything. I don't know if they ever sold ads around any of it, but we just kind of kept doing it. And over time, we developed what is now the basic format of the show. I revived it. I left Wired in 2002, revived it back in 2014 when I had this writing collective in Indiana. And I just did it with Midwestern writers once a month. It was fun. When I came out here to Carnegie Mellon about 2.5, 3 years ago, I thought, I'm going to stop doing it with just, the writing collective, because it that went away when I came out here. A lot of my friends are writers, right? They've done, Janelle, Evan, people, you can go back and listen to the show. And I had a good time, because I'd never really had the writers' conversation with them. So it was exciting for me to have the discussion about how these people became writers, because I just knew them as people who happened to be writers. And around October, November of last year, I thought, this is going pretty well. Maybe I should try to do this more. So I'd started hatching this plan for doing this like twice a week, which is a lot of work. And I'm the editorial director of a press at Carnegie Mellon. I thought, I don't know if I have time. You know, it takes a good 15, 20 hours to do 2 shows with all of the stuff we do around it. Outreach, social, you know, all building all of the stuff that you see. But I thought, you know, the feedback that I get from people that listen, the people who are on the show seem to enjoy it. So either everybody's lying to me, which is absolutely possible, and as a writer, it's 100% what I think, right? Like, they're like, oh, this was great. I'm like, was it great, though? Like, that's just not how typically that is not how writers respond to things. So I put out a call and just said, hey, you know, when the pandemic hit and I knew bookstores were closed, I had sort of been spending a few months on this, and I thought, well, I guess we'll see if people want to be on the show and see if people want to listen. And since like the middle of February, I've done 2 shows a week through now. Listenership has gone up. We've started doing happy hours. We've built more things out. I asked Stephanie to come on as my partner because I don't like doing things by myself. I like you partner with people who are better at you than things that you do. Like that's how you build stuff. And I sent a note to my friend Nicole. Nicole had been part of the writing collective that I had started in Indianapolis, and she came on as a partner. And I remember her talking about this podcast that she was part of, which is the Mother May I Sleep With podcast. She was very excited when she was doing this. And I was very excited to have her as a partner because I thought, oh, well, we'll go into maybe we'll do some audio stuff, or we'll take what I'm doing and, you know, make that be, you know, bigger. And it didn't happen there. But I knew that the podcast, which is hosted by Molly McAleer, Molly and Nicole are the Solid Listen Podcast Network. I sent Nicole a note and said, hey, you know, I've rejected being part of a network because I didn't want this show to be a thing where I have to interview people that I don't want to interview. I interview exactly who I want to interview. And she was like, we're actually looking to expand, and I think it would be great if you came on. So we had a big conversation. We were supposed to have like an hour conversation, Molly, I, and Nicole. And it ended up being like 3.5 hours. And we just all like, everything hit. And I went away, and Stephanie and I had a conversation, and we sort of went over like, does this make sense for us? And we were both like, yeah, man, this seems to make a lot of sense. And so on August 3rd, we will be porting all of our stuff over into the Solid Listen Network. Our first guest will be Allison Wood, whose book, Being Lolita, is out on August 4th, I think. And we're doing a happy hour with her on August 14th. That's why we're doing it. It's sort of our big coming out party for this. And it's very exciting to do because part of what I enjoy about this show is interviewing authors, but I enjoy that because what I want to do is introduce authors to an audience. I don't care if people listen to the podcast because we do lots of other stuff. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook. We're about to start doing a whole bunch more because Stephanie has this plan for what we should do. And I'm very excited to support all of that as we do this in the same way that she's supporting me with the show and really like make this partnership something that takes authors out into all these different parts of the world. So that's very exciting for us. And it's been a journey to get here. And I will say that the one thing will change. One thing very specifically is going to change about the show. So when I started doing this back in 2014, because I ran the writing collective, I hosted a lot of the shows. I put together a lot of stuff. I was running around and interacting with lots of people in the Midwest who, lots of groups and collectives and independent publishers. And so the guests reflected more of the world in which I live in. And when I sort of conceptualized what the new show should be, to do this for 18 months and see if we can really build this into what I think we can build it into, and if we can continue to attract more people like you, if you all continue to review the show and share it with your friends and do all that stuff, that we have a really interesting opportunity to turn this into a fun program and a smart program, and one that is both literate, doesn't take itself too seriously, but also engages in the world around us. And if you look at the guests over the last 5 or 6 months, I haven't done a good job with that. In large part because I was very passive. I sent notes out and said, who has books coming out in the pandemic? But I sent them out into the networks, like my social networks and things like that, without sort of thoughtfully going into places and actively looking for people. I took folks who showed up, and everybody has been amazing and wonderful. All of this is not their failing. This is my failing. So as we get into the Solid Listen Network, and as Stephanie and I sort of finish up this wave of getting everything together, one of the things that we both have talked a lot about was making sure we get back to the original form of what the show was, which is not just being passive about guests who show up. And we'll continue to do that because as people recommend stuff, I book pretty much all authors because I want to talk to all of you. Big houses, little houses, self-publishing, film writers, theater folks, improv comics, all of that stuff is exciting to me. Writing takes on many forms, but being more thoughtful about who we have on the show and making sure that we're not just taking who shows up, but also being reflective of the world that's around us, right? I've said on the show many times, the state of nature is diverse. And if you find yourself in a world that isn't, you've done that. And so I have not been great about that over the last few months. And that, with Stephanie's help, is going to change. So we're excited for all of this stuff that's coming, right? We're excited to be part of the network. I'm excited to work with Nicole again. I'm really excited to work with Molly. She's great and wonderful, and her podcast, Mother May I Sleep With podcast, is hilarious. And I have lots of friends who watch Lifetime movies and do all this stuff. And when you go see some of the other shows, like, it is a pop culture network. And I was concerned that we didn't exactly fit into that, but the more I sort of interact with everything, like, I feel like we're actually a pretty good fit in there. So I'm excited for all that. I appreciate everybody who's been listening. I appreciate all the new listeners. I appreciate all of the authors who have been with us for the last 6 months, who have given us their time and energy to do all this stuff. Stephanie's work is amazing and has made everything we do look better. And I'm very excited for this next iteration of the Downtown Writers Jam podcast. At the moment, I'm most excited to bring you my conversation with Nikki Smith, whose book All in Her Head is, at least in the first third, is some dark shit that's really good, and I cannot recommend it enough. And without further ado, here is my interview with Nikki. So how many cats do you have?
I've got one cat. And she's a chocolate Burmese, and she's called Safi. I think she's actually got some kind of official weird name, like Carmela or something. That she was kind of, when we got her, that's what the breeder kind of named her. But we changed that, and she's just Safi to us. So yeah, she's lovely.
So let me ask, because my dog's name is the name that he came with. How hard was it for you to change the cat's name?
Not very hard at all.
Really?
I think I've got a certificate in a drawer somewhere with her original name on, and every now and again when we get a phone call from the vet, they'll say, "Oh, Carmela's due this," and I'm thinking, "Who?" And then it's like, "No, Safi." But they don't. She doesn't answer to her name. She'll fetch things for you. She's a bit dog-like like that. If you throw something like a small ball or something across the floor, she'll go and catch it and bring it back. So in that way, she's very much like a dog. And compared to a lot of cats I know, she is quite needy on her terms. But she loves kind of the attention. So if she's in the right mood, she'll kind of climb all over you, want to sit on your shoulder and have a bit of a chat and things. So she's 8.
When we got Max, I was like, I don't want to call my dog Max, right? Like, every dog is named Max. That's just like the name. And I, like, for a week, I was like, well, maybe I'll call him this. And I just kept coming back to the fact that like he answered to that because he was about a little less than a year, but he'd been called that enough. And I thought, well, if I change his name, you know, that's going to hurt his feelings or he's not going to know what's going on. Like literally. And they spelled the name with 2 X's. So my dog's name is Maxx. And I'm like, well, that's like, there's nothing about that makes any sense at all. But I had this existential crisis that, well, you can't just change that's the dog's name. Like that's what he knows. So I think it's funny that you were like, no, I didn't like that cat name. Like we changed that immediately. Yes. That may be the difference between cat and dog owners.
Yeah, and also she was tiny when we got her, you see. So she was only kind of, I don't know, 12 weeks old, something like that. So yeah, it was much easier for us. So yes. So does he knows what his name is now? That if you called him Max, would he have any idea that he was still called Max?
Yes. So the fun fact about my dog, he does everything but come when called. So we did this whole training. You know, he passed all the training, and the last day, you're in this big PetSmart store. They put us on one side, the dog was on the other, and the only thing you had to do was call his name, and the dog is supposed to run to you. Our dog just ran laps around the PetSmart with his tongue hanging out at full speed, full Britney speed, looking at us the whole time. Like, I hear you calling my name, but look what I'm doing. And so he knows his name, but I've found that it's, you know, not helpful to get him to come to me. So that is the tale of Max, the idiot dog. So where are you at? You're over in England, yeah?
I am indeed. Yes, I'm in, just outside a town called Guildford, which is kind of about half an hour south of London on the train.
And what's it like over there right now?
Well, today it's 31 degrees, so it's absolutely baking. But I think it's the hottest day this year so far. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful when it's like this. And we were told yesterday that we are coming out of lockdown here. So it's quite exciting. We should be able to kind of return to some kind of relative normality. And I'll be able to go and see my parents, which is lovely because I haven't seen them since February.
Yeah. So, are you nervous about opening back up?
Yes, definitely. I think it's going to be very odd because it's not going to be normal. We'll all try and kid ourselves that it's normal, but yes, and obviously I think being nervous about a second wave coming and all the rest of it. So yeah, and just seeing people, I think just interacting with people is going to feel quite exhausting actually after not having, seen anyone other than, immediate family. It's going to be very strange, but also nice. So
yeah, it's been, as we've opened up here, I'm in Pittsburgh. As we have opened up, I've gone out and I've done hiking. Like I haven't really gone to, I'm not going to restaurants and anything like that. Like that all seems crazy to me.
Are they open over where you are?
Yeah. So in Allegheny County, where I'm at in Pittsburgh, we just went to green. So we have a green, red, and yellow. Mm-hmm. And green allows you to open, but with social distance measures. So like you can only be at like 40% capacity and you have to have, my gym is open. They've blocked off like 15-foot spaces and they put all the equipment in there, which is great. So you just you sign up, you show up, there's nobody around you, you wipe all your equipment down. Like everything it's just sort of this self-contained little areas. It's a big warehouse. So that actually feels okay because people are there, but they're, 20, 30 feet from you.
Yes.
But even in a restaurant, I'm like, that's inside. And I don't know, like it just feels different to me.
Yes. Well, they've changed ours now here. So we did have a 2-meter distancing rule. And then as of, I think it's the 4th of July, that's going to change to 1 meter.
Really?
So it's the only way they can get all the kind of pubs and restaurants to reopen. But we're not allowed, indoor gyms can't reopen, and swimming pools. My daughter dives, like high board diving, and none of that is reopening. So you can go and sit in a pub less than a meter away from somebody, but you can't swim. I think libraries are reopening, which is good. But it's a bit. I don't fancy going and sitting in a restaurant next to somebody particularly either. Not at the moment.
And like, I'm an extrovert, so it has been really, 100 days of being locked in a house with just a dog has been rough. But I was telling somebody the other day, I went to the eye doctor. I was the first patient that they had in like 90 days. And the women are amazing. They're great. But, I'm almost 50. They got to be in their late 20s, early 30s. So we don't have a whole lot in common. And when I got done with with my exam, we all sat in 10 feet away from each other and we're just like, tell me everything about your life. And we talked for an hour and I was laughing when I left because I'm like, well, we'd never speak in real life. Like that conversation would never have happened. But we were so like another human being. Like, tell me all of the things you've done sitting in your house. And it was the most amazing thing ever. Just like, it was cathartic to just have, another human respond.
Yes. I think we had something delivered actually by somebody that we kind of vaguely know, but not that well. And it ended up being a kind of half an hour discussion on the doorstep because it was like, yes, I know you can't actually come in, but it's really exciting to see anybody. So,
it's a good reminder that no matter how civilized we think we are, we're like 90 days away from
Yes, I know. I mean, when you say, February to kind of June, or July, okay, so end of March. So we've been April, May, June, 3 months. And that doesn't sound a long time at all when you just say 3 months, but it's felt like forever. Yeah.
Yeah. And, this is a little bit off topic, but it's, my mentor does work in one of the big prisons here. He runs a newspaper in San Quentin out in California. And he's always talking about confinement and just sort of policies of policing in America. And I've had conversations with my friends. I'm like, we're going stir crazy 100 days when we have our apartment and you can walk around in 5 different rooms and whatever. Like, imagine if you're in a little cell.
Yes.
And that's your daily, and you're sequestered from everybody and they put you in solitary for 90 days. Like, think about your mental health and all the things you can do and how you're still breaking down.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, I mean, a friend of mine has got friends in Italy and who were a family and they had 4 kind of old teenage boys and it's a flat that they lived in. So when they went into lockdown they were kind of just outside Lombardy, I think. And I think that they were like that for about 4.5, 5 months, something like that. They were kind of there for, with kind of, about 4 or 5 people in a very, very small flat with no outside space. Yeah.
That can't even, I am thankful because there are 2 gigantic parks, one to the left and one to the right of my house, like 700, 800 acre parks. So at least the hour and a half that I walk the dog every day, you're out in green and the other 22 and a half hours kind of suck, but it was like, well, I breathed some air. I saw some nature.
Exactly.
That's get you.
Yeah. See, because I think in Italy, they weren't even allowed out, not outside at all, not for a while.
Wow. I mean, it was also very bad there. So
yes,
you understand it. So where are you originally from?
Always from England. Yes. So I grew up, I grew up in kind of a few places because my dad's job moved around. So I kind of started in Oxted, which is in Surrey, and then we moved up to kind of Bedfordshire, which is kind of north of London, and then we moved kind of back down south again, and different kind of areas, Surrey, mainly kind of Surrey and Sussex though, and ended up most of the time in a little village called South Nutfield, which is kind of near Reigate, kind of on the M25, just outside London.
So you've been sort of around the London, like the greater London area?
Yes.
And what were you, so do you have brothers and sisters?
I do. I've got one brother. He's 5 years younger than me.
So you're the senior.
I am the senior. Yes, indeed.
And go ahead.
I was just going to say he now lives in Devon. So both my parents live in Devon. They moved away from London when my dad retired. And my brother went down to Devon as well. So that's about a kind of 3-hour car journey away from me. And he's got a family now. He's married. He's got kind of 2 little boys. So now we've lifted lockdown. It means I can actually, well, come July, I'll be able to go and see them, which is really nice. So.
Yeah, my parents, they go to Arizona they got a timeshare. So they leave the day after Christmas and they're in Arizona. They were supposed to be back in April. They literally leave today to drive back home. Yeah, so they had to extend their stay for like 3 months.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So like my family's kind of scattered across the Midwest. So we're all like, we're all making that same plan right now. Like, okay, we're open. We don't know how long we're going to be open. Like, let's go see each other and hug each other, and like phone calls are great, but I need to like actually be in person with you.
Yeah, we're not allowed to hug each other at the moment at all. No physical contact, even with family.
I am sure we are not either, but I feel like that we're going to. Like
I think it may. Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree, Brad. I think that might slip slightly.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Like I am very happy to protect the whole world, but like the family, like I think we've all kind of decided, like, look, if the hug kills us, the hug's going to kill us. But like, this just has to happen because we need something. And sleeping with a dog is great, but it's not the same as hugging your sisters.
That's very true. Yes.
So what were you guys, what did your parents do when you guys were growing up?
My mum was a primary school teacher. So yeah, she taught kind of kids anywhere between 7 and kind of 10. I remember going into school actually with her sometimes and helping in the classroom and things like that. Yeah. I don't know how she did it. I would never have the patience. And my dad, worked for a building society over here, which is kind of like a bank. So yeah, they kind of, deal with mortgages and stuff in the UK. So yeah, he did that. And
were you and your brother close growing up?
I think more so as we got older.
That sounded like a no. Yeah.
But yeah, I think that, because of that age gap, definitely when we were, when he was born and things, I can't even really remember, to be honest. And then we had, a few years where, yes, we definitely were close because I used to really enjoy playing Lego and things like that with him. And that was great. And then as we got older, I obviously hit kind of teenage years when he was still kind of only, 8 or 9. So then for about, I reckon 5 years, we weren't particularly close. I was just kind of off doing my thing and he was off doing his thing. And then we've now kind of come around full circle and now we are much closer.
Yeah. The 5 years is different. Like my full sister is 5 years older than me. And we sort of joked, like we were raised as only children in the same household just because we were sort of never in the same school and she played piano and I did sports. And like, we just sort of like, even in our very small town, it was like 5, 6, 7,000 people. So you knew everybody, but it was like, well, she was off doing drama and theater and stuff. And I was running around with athletes being an idiot. And so we didn't even really run in the same circle. It wasn't until really later in life that we were like, oh shit. We're friends.
Yes.
5 years when you're in your 40s isn't a big deal anymore.
No, absolutely. I think it was when when my brother went off to university and then I'd obviously started work and things by then, and I went down to stay with him. That's when I was like, oh, we can get on as adults, kind of things. We just hadn't really spent that much time together really before.
Yeah, and Sherry and I will say, like, the things that made us different, because we were very different, but they all came from the same place, right? Like, we were raised in the same household, so we were responding to stuff going on in the house. We just did it differently. And as you get older, and that's sort of like, I'm not an athlete anymore. She's not a piano. Like, now we're just adults doing our thing. It's like, oh, you did this because of that. And you see it, and you understand it, right? Like, you're better than anybody else on the planet. Like,
that's very true. Yes, I'm definitely much more, I think, I'd say I'm much more of an extrovert than my brother. And, if there's an argument kind of thing, I'm, right in it and kind of defending my position, whereas he's much better at, just kind of calming everything over and being a much more kind of peaceful influence, I'd say. Yes.
My sister just leaves. She's like, this is dumb. I'm not doing this. Whereas I'm like, I have planted my flag. I have my armies. We will be here until the very bitter end.
Yes, that's like me.
Yeah. So, what are you like in school? Like, were you bookish? Were you a school kid, or were you out causing trouble?
I think I was reasonably bright at school, and I did well, kind of thing, exam wise. But I think my parents despaired at certain points because I don't know. I think I was a bit of a rebel when I was a teenager. So yeah, I was out in, pubs when I was kind of 14 and kind of hung around with people I probably shouldn't have been hanging around with. But I always knew that I wanted to get good grades and wanted to go to university. So I probably didn't show it, but I did work hard. But I also played hard as well.
Yeah, it's the sort of unofficial rule in my household was as long as you have A's, you're okay.
Yes.
And I was like, which is actually a very bad lesson to learn because I look around at like America now and I'm like, oh shit, this is a bunch of people that just figured out how the system works and now they're doing whatever they want. But as a kid, it was like, oh, that's great. I'll just get A's because that's not hard to do. And
yeah.
Then when I get in trouble, I'm like, yeah, but I'm getting A's. Like, how much trouble can I really be in?
Yes, exactly.
All right. So now I know a little bit about you. You and I have some things in common.
Yes.
So where do you go to university? Like, and what are you going for? Like you said you wanted to go. Did you have, I'm going to be a writer in mind, or were you like, oh,
no, shit? I did an English degree actually. I went to a place called Birmingham University. So I just wanted to go somewhere that was a really big town because I grew up in quite a small village. So I was
Birmingham's not that big though.
It is big.
I've been there. Like I'm just saying, it's not a big city.
It's big for the UK,
right?
Yeah, so I just wanted, I was just desperate to kind of, get into a big city and
you wanted out of the house. You wanted to go see the world.
Definitely. Yes, exactly. So
and you studied English there?
I did English, yeah. So I have always loved writing, and I loved my English degree. I had no idea what I was going to do with it afterwards, but I loved it, and made lots of friends there. And then, kind of towards the end of my degree, we were in a pretty much in a recession in the UK. So it was like, right, what am I going to do with my life? And
when was that?
So that was, let me think, 91.
Yeah.
I graduated. Yes, that's right.
So I graduated in 94. There was a big, 87, 88, there was like a gigantic stock market crash.
Yeah.
The world sucked for a few years.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yes. No, actually, it was 93 that I left. So, okay. Yeah.
But I graduated in 94 and I was just telling some friends last night, in journalism, and there was a recession going on at the time.
Yeah.
The economy was not in great shape.
No, exactly. So I was kind of like, right, well, what do I do? And with an English degree, we didn't really get careers advice particularly at university at all. It was just everybody for themselves. So some of the kind of financial firms were still hiring just about then. So I just thought, right, I'll apply to anyone on the kind of milk. In the UK, we call it a milk round. Some of the kind of firms come round to the university and say, hey, do you want to work for us? So, sent off loads of CVs and did that and kind of got a placement on a graduate placement on an accountancy course, which I thought, how hard can it be? And turns out pretty difficult, actually.
So wait a minute. So were you just looking for any job?
Yeah, any job.
So you literally did the writer thing where you're like, holy shit, my degree doesn't actually allow me to do anything.
Yes.
And rent costs money. I need a job.
Exactly. And I knew I didn't want to go back home either. That was the thing. I knew I didn't want to go back and live with my parents.
Right.
So
but not because you didn't get along, just because you were now a person of the world.
Yeah, exactly. And I think as well, I we'd have killed each other, to be honest, I think, if I'd have gone back. It was just after having that kind of freedom for 3 years, I just didn't want to go back and live in someone else's house. So
when I was in college, my parents sold our house, the house we grew up in. And I literally, my bed was the last thing taken out because I was asleep. It was like 9 a.m. And the movers woke me up and they're like, you have to go. And so I left my pants on the floor, like put them on and left. And my parents bought a condo that didn't have it had a second room, but not like a tiny closet, like half bathroom. And they said, like, you're the last, like, nobody's coming home to live. Like,
oh my God.
We've sort of done our business and, you can stay for a couple weeks, but this isn't really a home for you anymore.
Yes. Well, mine moved to Devon. That was when they moved kind of from where we were living at the time in Sussex down to Devon. That was when I was at university. So I was just like, if I moved to Devon with them, it's kind of, it's rural. It's the middle of nowhere. There's fields, and as lovely it is for them, I was like, I'm going to hate this. I'm going to absolutely hate this.
Right.
So
they did their version of that to you, like, she'll never come back here.
Yes. I mean, there is a bedroom still waiting for me, but I never went back to it.
Right. And everybody lived happily ever after.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So I got this kind of placement on this graduate scheme, and off I went to London. Moved into a tiny little flat behind a bingo hall in Tooting, which if you know London, it's pretty grim. It was an interesting area.
What part of the city? Like, where's it at?
It's south. It's kind of nearly at the bottom of the Northern Line on the tube.
Okay, so you're like it's on the edges of, like, across the river.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, most definitely. And I mean, it was, you used to have people used to sit, I remember every time I came out of the tube station, like in the evening, they'd have people sitting on a sofa outside the tube station. It was really grim. But it was my flat. And
Did you live by yourself?
Yes, I did indeed. I had different friends kind of, there was like a spare kind of room. So different ones of my friends came to live with me at different points just for, a few months or whatever. And then I think I did that for about a year. And then I moved into just down the road really from Tooting, kind of, but more towards Wimbledon. So slightly, up in the world. And some girlfriends and I shared a house for a couple of years. So that was fabulous. That was really good.
And are you just doing the finance thing the whole time? Like this sort of the accidental career that happens?
Yes. So you have to, in the UK, to be an accountant, you've got to train for 3 years and pass all these exams, which, I mean, it was much harder than I thought it would be, to be honest with you. Yes, it was. It was really, really tough. And I had to work. Obviously, I was working in the day for the company, and then you're expected to kind of go home and study in the evening. So it was really difficult. But I made some of the kind of best friends that I still see, a lot of today there. So from that point of view, it was fantastic. But
were you doing it? Did you have designs on writing at this point, or were you just sort of like? Okay, so
yes. So I was I was still writing stuff, but I didn't actually get a lot of time to myself between kind of working and then studying in the evening. So writing was kind of pushed to the back, I guess, of my priorities. But I did still write stuff. My kind of intention was always, I want to write a book. But I just, didn't have the kind of time or the knowledge, I think, either, to be able to do it.
This is like one of the recurring themes on this show is that every writer everyone, almost without exception, has said, well, I kind of knew I wanted to be a writer. I did not know how to go about doing that.
Yes.
It's not like I would like to be an astrophysicist. So you go, I take physics, I take, astronomy, and then I go to graduate school and then I do a postdoc. Like there's not like a path to be a writer. It's like, you should start writing until you're done.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And I don't think, at the time when I graduated, there weren't even kind of creative writing degrees. When I did an English degree, it was kind of an English literature degree. So, we studied all kinds of writing, from kind of Chaucer all the way through to the present day, which was fabulous. And I loved it, but it didn't teach me how to write a book, which is what I wanted to be able to do.
Well, and this is the other thing, right? Is that people, if you go in and do English and you think, oh, well, this is where I'm going to go to learn to be a writer. And you don't realize an English degree is like a textual analysis of reading. Like you're learning how to read from a scholarly perspective. And look, The Wife of Bath, I love Chaucer. Like I'm one of those weird, like The Wife of Bath is one of the great, like, you just read it and you're like, how is that written, 900 years ago? Like, this is a really progressive, like, she's like taking no shit from anybody. So that was fun. But then when we would have like an hour discussion about like, well, what do you think this thing meant? I'm like, I don't know. I don't.
Yes.
And like, you don't either. Like, the table doesn't it's not anything. It's just a table.
Yes.
Like you're missing the bigger point. And like, I feel, and this is probably not universal, but I feel like, I used to tell young writers, if you've been told you're a good writer and the person telling you that taught English literature, you're probably not a good writer.
Yes.
Because they're different. Like telling a story is different than textual analysis.
Absolutely.
And they're different kinds of things. So did you kind of know that when you went to get your English degree, or did you?
No, I had absolutely no idea that was going to be like that. It's
good to have the base, but
yes, yeah, exactly. I feel exactly the same as you actually, with all that kind of textual analysis was, kind of did my head in, I think, after a while. So we could do quite a lot on the English language side of this degree that I did. So, and you could kind of choose when you were there. So when I was there and I realized that, I was like, okay, I'll do more of that. But that was more, again, it was the more, I kind of guess, practical analysis of the English language, like how we learn to speak and, why people talk different languages and, all of that kind of side of things. And it was really interesting. It was fascinating. But again, it wasn't really helping me write a novel.
And I would sit in those classes and I would see, like when I'm with writers, like you and I have never met. I've met most of the people on this show, but I can sit down and have a conversation because we got enough in common just because of that. And when I had an English degree as well, and I would sit in those classes and be like, well, why do people think the table means this thing? Like, I felt like I didn't have some base of knowledge where they were like pulling these things from. And I'm like, well, that doesn't, I know when I write, I don't sit down and I'm like, well, there's going to be a fucking table and that's going to stand for patriarchy. Like, that's just like, maybe, I don't know if you've ever had that, but like, that is not how stories happen for me.
Exactly. No, I totally agree. Yeah, completely agree.
So you're in finance. You're accidentally having a career, as every great writer does. You have a career in finance, and you're not able to write because of your job and the tests. Yeah. So, like, what begins? Like, how does that break?
Well, I think that. Well, first of all, I think it took me 3 years. So I got the accountancy qualification after 3 years. And then I moved into working for a bank, actually, which was, interesting. And I disliked it so much. I thought, right, I am going to plough the time that I've now got into writing a novel. So I did. I wrote one. It took me a couple of years in between, trying to work at the same time. But it wasn't very good, looking back. Surprisingly. I
feel like a lot of novelists have a first novel that's in the It's like, when I die, somebody burn this.
Yes, absolutely. But it's good practice, I think, as well. I think you do, there's a lot of people who've kind of done one and then put it away, but it teaches you a lot about trying to write a novel, and what does work and what doesn't work and things like that.
People that I know who have published their first novel, like, rewrote it 10 times.
Yes.
So it's really not their first novel. Like,
no.
At the end, it's based on a true story, right? Like, at the end is like inspired by the first thing, but this is a totally different book.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is one of those things people don't talk about, right? Like, I got my first book published. Yeah, but it took 12 years and 10 rewrites. So was it your first book?
Yeah, exactly. I think I saw a survey the other day actually on Twitter or something that was saying to people, how many books did it take you to get published? And out of the number, most people, the vast majority had kind of one or two at least books that they'd written before they got published.
Yeah.
And whether they tell you that or not is, but yeah.
Do you have a file of like, do you throw your writing out, or do you have a digital file that's like, oh, here's all the shit that I started that never went anywhere? Or like if you're editing something and you're like, well, these 10,000 words don't fit, do you delete them?
Yes.
Or do you have a file?
I think somewhere in my loft is actually a floppy disk with my original novel on it somewhere, which, I don't think that would probably be retrievable now again. But now when I write, yes, if I cut things like large, things, if I cut out chapters and stuff, I will always paste it into a different document and keep it. I just can't bear to throw it away. You never know when you might need it again.
It's the most, it is one of the things I love about writers the most. It's like, not like, you'll read it in the context and you're like, well, this is rubbish. This is a piece of shit. This will never be. I'm just going to put this over here just in case, right? Like, you don't delete anything because you're like, in the back of your head, you're like, this might be brilliant though.
Yeah, exactly. Or I might need it in future. Or I don't know why I do it, but yeah, definitely. Always keep those.
I know zero authors and writers that actually delete anything.
Yes.
It's why I think you need, like there's always the joke, like everybody has the friend that comes and deletes your computer if you die and, clears your search. Like, I think writers are like, look, I only give a shit about, you're going to see a folder that says old writing. Delete that. Get rid of that, right? Like, once I'm gone, I want nobody to know that existed.
Yes, that's very true. And I think it's as well because I like seeing the word count that's there as well. So even though it wouldn't necessarily make it into my novel, it's kind of like, okay, so those words still exist somehow. And I can think, oh, well, I wrote 150,000 words to get that 80,000 word novel kind of thing. I like that as well.
Have you ever, you have the daily word count things. Have you ever been like, I can't write today? And you're like, let me go look through the old slush file and see if I can't resurrect 1,000 words today. Is that?
No, I've never done that.
I feel like I just got lied to.
No, honestly, I don't.
Really?
Really. No, because I just, I think once they're gone, they're gone. I know really deep down they're gone, but they're just kind of still there in a separate document. Just in case. Because
I will, for whatever reason, the way I write, and I do nonfiction, so I think it's a little different. I know it's different. I'll write stuff and it just doesn't fit into a thing, but I don't know if other nonfiction writers are like that or if it's just me, but I'll sometimes write things and I think it goes in one place, but it really goes in a completely different piece, maybe one that I'm thinking about. And I'll 6 months later be like, holy shit, I wrote this whole 4,000 word thing. It goes in this piece here. And so that's part of the reason I don't get rid of stuff is because,
yours really might come back and be useful.
Whereas fiction, you plot that thing out and you're like, look, if this doesn't fit, it's not suddenly going to fit in Act 3 if it doesn't fit in Act 2.
Yeah, exactly. I think maybe you could do it with, I don't know, some of the settings and stuff like that. I guess you could kind of cut and paste, shove in a bit of, whatever, a train journey or something and just change everything about the character that's in it. But to be honest, you might as well start again from scratch. So, yeah.
Yeah, oftentimes I have to smooth it over and write, but I'm like, oh, the essence and nugget of what I want to say, I've said here. The other thing is, and this is, I don't normally talk about process on the show, but every once in a while, and I'm assuming fiction writers do this too, you'll write a sentence or a paragraph and you're like, chef's kiss, oh, that shit is amazing. It doesn't fit, but I'm going to make it fit somewhere at some point because this is really good.
Yes. and you know what happens with those bits, Brad? The editor usually rings them round and go, nah.
My mentor,
I want to keep that bit. Yeah.
My mentor in graduate school used to say, if you write something and you laugh, you've just been cruel to somebody. So I always sort of keep that in mind. I'm like, oh, if I write something and I think it's brilliant, this may only be brilliant to me. Like, because I think writers are predisposed to, you don't really like your stuff. You see the flaws in it because you're trying to make it perfect. So you see what's not perfect about it. So if I write something and I'm like, that's perfect, I'm like, I'm not seeing this right.
Yes, that's very true.
Yeah, I should delete this and never let anybody see it because it might be something terrible.
And I think sometimes that's when, if you leave it for kind of a couple of weeks and come back to it, on like a second read through or whatever, that's when you can spot things like that as well.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, that sentence that I thought was really good is actually quite naff. Yes.
So when you wrote that first novel, did you know it was bad when you finished it, or was it one that you sort of put away and came back and were like, oh boy, that didn't work?
No, I submitted it to agents, and I got a couple of people were kind of interested and asked to see. Well, I submitted the first 3 chapters, and then a couple of people were interested to ask for the full. So it wasn't totally horrendous, but it wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't, good enough to get.
It wasn't the debut novel.
No, exactly. And I think at that point, I kind of gave up. Really, I just thought, it's not for me. I'm not good enough to get published, and I shouldn't really be wasting my time. I mean, it was hard, kind of, keeping down a full-time job, which was quite stressful and very long hours, and writing as well. As I'm sure all writers have, done very similar things. We're all kind of doing these ridiculous getting up early or going to bed incredibly late in order to get that novel written.
To do a thing that everybody says, well, this will never be a job.
Exactly.
And you're like, what the fuck am I doing?
Yeah. Exactly. Yes.
I'm just going to go smash my head against the wall for 6 hours a day and not tell anybody.
Exactly. So I think at that point I was like, what the hell am I doing? So I kind of stopped
tell
for
you
a bit.
that, right? Like people
No.
Again, this gets back to the training. So in your head, did you think, well, if I do this once and it doesn't work, I guess I'm just not a writer?
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Which is unlike any other thing you did in your life. Like, you didn't walk into the accounting firm and be like, well, I can't do this on the first day, so I guess I can't work in finance.
Exactly. But I think people assume that it's kind of it's like when you hear about books being published and it just seems to come out of nowhere, and this person has been fantastic and they've written something that's fantastic, and you just automatically assume, well, I should be able to do that. They don't tell you that they've actually been writing for 10 years and, they've tried to do 2 before and they failed 2. It's just suddenly, people are an overnight success.
It's one of the unique, and I don't know if it's unique, but I'm going to say it's unique. It's unique to writers in that you sit alone by yourself. Say, it takes, say, 18 months to write a book, and nobody sees it, really. Nobody knows what you're doing. You're just turning plans down all the time, and you're telling people you're doing a thing, and it's not until they see the physical product that you can go, this is the thing that I did.
Yes.
And that's if you know what you're doing, right? Like 18 months is if you know how to do it. If you don't, like you said, like, I don't know I know a few novelists who just sort of like hit that creative, thing.
Brilliant. Yeah.
But almost all of them immediately viewed it as some kind of trauma. Like, if your first book sells really well, you're immediately like, well, now I'm expected to do this every time.
Yeah.
And you may not know how to, like, you're like, well, I don't really know what I just did. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it
That's
is like,
so true.
It's such a craft, and it's so amorphous, and there's not a way that we train people how to do it unless you get an MFA, which most people don't. You're sort of like fucking wandering around in the dark.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. And even when you've done one, as you say, that's the thing. You don't. It feels completely different when you come back to it again, and you're looking at a kind of blank screen on a computer, and it's like, well, how did I do that the first time? I can't remember start. I don't know what I did. What did I do? So,
my friend Janelle, I've talked about Janelle Brown, who's my friend. Like, I knew her before she was a novelist, so I knew that she was writing. It took her 22 years to finally get. Her 3 books before were really, they were good, but like this 4th book, bestseller, like optioned as a TV show, like all of the stuff that you hope and wish happens to your book. And, people are like, oh my God, it's great. I'm like, yeah, that took her 25 years. You know, like
exactly.
I've seen all of her essays from, way back and like she's great, but I've also seen her evolve, and she would be the first to tell you she understands writing differently today than she did when she started 20 years ago.
Yeah. Yes.
But there's if somebody said, how do you do it? It's like, well, fuck, start 20 years ago and start writing.
Yes, exactly.
It's like going to the gym. Like, how'd you get muscles?
Yeah.
Like, well,
yes,
I went to the gym and did the thing every day.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So the first one doesn't sell, and you are like, I am not an artist. But how long does that last? Doesn't last long.
So no, it didn't last that long. But I think that I was much more wary about kind of talking about what I wanted to do. Instead of like, I want to be an author, I was like, we're just not going to talk about that anymore.
I'm an accountant.
Exactly. I'm an accountant. And then I kind of went on. I had 2 children, and I kind of wrote stuff, but just for me, kind of, quietly. I didn't try writing another book. Just every now and again, I'd have an urge to, I don't know, just, write like a diary or, just something or whatever. And I'd kind of keep.
You weren't you weren't submitting short story. You weren't doing it. You were raising children and having a career, but writing wise, you weren't doing anything.
No, exactly. I was doing nothing. Yeah. Yeah.
Was there a part of you that was like, this doesn't feel right? Or was life moving along that you were like, well, this is what my life is?
Yeah, I think that's probably why I kind of kept a diary and things all that time, because I had to write something. I don't feel, I still get a bit itchy feet kind of thing if I'm not writing something. But I think it was just life was so busy, having 2 kind of small kids and, and working. It was just like, okay, I don't have to do this. And I think because I'd kind of half killed myself to get the first one out, or finish the first one anyway, I was like, okay, I'll just wait. And I think I always knew as well in the back of my mind, I'd come back to it, and that it wasn't a race, and I just had to just wait until the right time.
It's an interesting phenomenon, the whole writing thing, because as I've gotten older, and I think maybe not having the MFA, like not going through the like writer gauntlet, right? Like doing the other thing where you're like, well, I've come to writing sort of external to any sort of formal training. And, you read advice and stuff and people are like, write every day and blah, blah, all that stuff. And you sort of begin to say, well, I guess this is what writers do. And then you realize like, well, what writers do or whatever I decide I'm going to do. Yes. Like that's what writers do.
Yes, exactly. And I think
there is this mythology, right? Like there's a mythology that you feel that sort of hovers over the idea of you calling yourself a writer.
Yes, definitely. And whether you kind of deserve that title, or not, depending on what you're doing at the time. But I just think you can always have ideas in your head, kind of, you can keep everything kind of ticking over. And I think that's probably what I was doing subconsciously. It was just building up.
Yeah. You were a writer because you had something to say and you were trying to figure out when you could say it. Mm. I think that's sort of like one of the hallmarks of writers is like, I can't get away from this thing.
Yes. Yes.
Because it's terrible. I always tell young writers, like, if you can do anything else, don't do this. This is a fucking terrible profession. It's horrible. You write something, and if people tell you it's good, you're like, well, you don't know anything. Like, my opinion of you immediately goes down. Right? Like, well, and if somebody's like, it's shit, you're like, that's true. What I put on the page is not worthy. So if that sounds fun and you can't get away from it, you're a writer. And if you're like, well, that's terrible, I'm like, well, you're not equipped for this.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's so true. Yes.
Yeah. Any joy is derived from like just other writers being like, well, that sentence was really good. And you're like, yes, that's the one thing that's good that I wrote, right? Like you discovered that as well.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, it's why I started the podcast, really.
Yes, exactly.
Because you have to share these experiences with other people. You're like, oh, fuck, we're not crazy. So you feel that way too.
Exactly. And I think so much of a writer's life is you're doing everything in isolation. and it's, unless, I don't know, maybe there are kind of creative writing degrees and stuff now that people can go on. I didn't do anything like that. I did go on a Curtis Brown course, which is like they're kind of a literary agency and they run creative writing courses. So, yeah.
Was it like something that you had to apply to, or was it like, hey, here, or you give him £100 and you get in?
And you have to apply to go on it. You also have to pay for it.
Right. So it's a double blind.
Double blow. So yes, I actually had, what happened with me was I had a friend, well, she wasn't a friend, I hadn't seen, I'd been to school with her, so like 20 years before, hadn't seen her since, and just out of the blue, completely, one day she found me, obviously, on Facebook and said, how are you, whatever. She's a barrister now, and she said, I just wondered if you'd done anything with your writing, because I still remember stories that you used to read out in class.
Really?
And yeah, which was lovely, actually, a bit surprising, but lovely.
Did your opinion of her go down?
I was like, are you sure? Are you sure you've got the right person?
Yeah. What have you been doing for the last 20 years? Read other books.
So I think that did give me a bit of it was one of those real, okay, I am gonna try this again. I'm gonna try it again. So
that's amazing. That like a Facebook message from the past was like, yeah, that was the thing. I mean, just think about it for a minute. That was the thing that like gave you it wasn't anything you had done. It was this external validation from somebody you hadn't talked to in 20 years. And you're like, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you think about that? Like, that's a weird.
It is, isn't it? Yes, very.
Like, why do you think why do you think it wasn't internal for you? Like, why do you like?
I don't know, really. I think, I don't know whether I think I was just waiting for something kind of thing that would give me that kind of reason to push forward with it. I don't know if I'd never have got that message, whether I'd have ever kind of gone, right, okay. I think I probably would have done, because it was getting to the point where my kids were that bit older, so they were a bit more self-sufficient. And, I had a bit more time around my job. So I think it was kind of, I might have got there, but that was the thing. That was the catalyst that made me. And
writing while parenting, I think, is one of the, like, I got a dog, so like I got time whenever, right? Like everybody who I talk to who's a parent, they're like, oh, I got 45 minutes here or 30. Like I can't even imagine how difficult it would be to write a long form thing in little bits and pieces.
Yes. And just that lack of headspace, I think. I mean, I've got two girls. I think girls tend to be very chatty and quite kind of, which is lovely in a lot of ways. But, at the end of the day, you're knackered, absolutely knackered. So I used to get up early. Was how I did it, very, very early, kind of 4:30, 5 before they woke up, so that I would get at least a couple of hours done before I kind of had to get them up and me out to work.
It's one of the things that I try to explain to people is writing. And whenever I work with young writers, I always tell them this, like you don't understand how deep you have to go into the empathy well when you're writing, like to really understand the people and this, and whether it's fiction or nonfiction, I don't care what it is. You have to be deeply engaged in like the emotional wellspring of your life to write realistic things, right? To understand people and things that are different than you and all that stuff. And this is why I think writing as a parent, or like, my dad told me, like, be a teacher and you can write in the summer. And like, what I didn't realize was, oh shit, you're taking on everybody's emotional life. Like there is no summer, right? Like,
exactly.
You are just in people's emotional lives, and sitting down and then doing that for 2 hours on the page is fucking exhausting.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And you've got to really want to do it, I think, I know plenty of people who've always, now I think particularly you probably had this as well, where people come up to you and go, oh, I've got a really good idea for a book, or I've always wanted to write a book. And you're like, yeah, okay, well, you go do that then, because, when you get to the end, then tell me. And yeah. Exactly.
I can't remember who said it, but I heard a writer say this a long time ago. Anytime somebody would come up to him and say like, oh, you're a writer? I want to write a book. He'd ask them what they did. Like, oh, you're a brain surgeon? I was thinking about doing that. And I'm like, it's sort of a dick response, but also like,
That's so true.
you know, like, yeah, you know the alphabet. That doesn't mean that you can write a story.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, that's the asshole part of being a writer.
Yes. I think people think it's like a bit of a nice hobby that you just kind of, you know, sit down at the end of the day with, you know, a feather pen and kind of, you know, look out over a lovely landscape and, you know, kind of put something down on paper, but it's actually not really like that, as you well know. So,
I think they think that a writer just sits down and says what they think. And I'm like, writing isn't pontificating, guys. Like, that's not like, you don't write universal things by saying this is the way things are, right? Like that's you have to create. That's where the empathy comes in, right? Like, how do I write a scene that, you know, even if it's the bad guy, people can understand the motive, you know.
Exactly.
I was Michael Lewis's graduate assistant when I was in school, and I've talked about this on the show before. He and I don't get along. He doesn't like me, feelings mutual. But the one thing that he said was, like, nobody thinks they're the bad guy, right? Like, that's the most important part about writing, is that everybody does, whatever your characters are doing, fiction or nonfiction, very few people get up in the morning and go, I am evil. Right. And so getting into that space where, like, when people are like, I want to write a book, I'm like, well, are you like, you're going to have to go into really dark places, and not like dark, like, but just like, I have to understand things that I maybe don't want to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Otherwise it'll just come out reading flat.
Yeah, you pontificate, like, and then the bad guy showed up, and it's like, I don't care. Like, shoot him in the head. Go. Like, be gone. So you're in this Curtis Brown creative course. How long does it last? Like, what? Because this is where you started the book. Yeah,
so it was 3 months online. So that's one of the reasons I chose it, actually, because it, you know, it didn't kind of present me with any childcare issues. So you could do the whole thing online, and you kind of got feedback from different people and tutors, and you also got to kind of send draft cover letters to agents and things like that.
That's amazing.
Which was amazing, which was really, really amazing.
Like if that would have been a degree in college.
Exactly.
It would have been way more helpful, right?
Absolutely, yes. So I think I learned more on that course about the publishing industry than I'd ever learned before. I had obviously no experience of the publishing industry. I didn't do anything in the publishing industry, so I knew nothing about it. So it taught me all about that. And then it just, you know, that was my goal, was kind of like, right, I've got 3 months. I need to get out a first draft. So that's what I did.
You did a first draft in 3 months?
Yeah.
Holy shit. So you went from... It was
quite a bad first draft, Brad, I have to say.
But the tagline on my website is a quote. I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, but it's from Hemingway, which is, the first draft of anything is shit.
Yeah.
Like,
yes.
The sooner you just say, look, writing is actually editing and rewriting. The first draft is just, get all this crap out of my head.
Yes, exactly. And then rearrange it into some kind of an order and structure that makes a lot more sense. And then that's what I did really for the next kind of, I think, about 8 months, was kind of take all of that and write it and rewrite it.
Were you still getting feedback after, like, once the course was over?
No.
That was that.
That was that. Once the course is over, that's that. But if I had, they were really good in, you know, if you've got any questions, or, you know, if somebody can help you with something, they're quite happy if you kind of drop them an email afterwards. But yeah, it was just that course was, you know, that's it, done.
And so when was this?
So that was back in 2017.
Wow. So like, this is like, you had gone, because I think you're like, we're about the same age. So you had gone quite a long time from, you know, we don't do math on the show, but everybody's now doing math. Like,
20 years, basically.
Yeah. You would spend more time not writing than writing.
Yeah. Yes, so kind of I left university at 21. I probably did my first novel, was kind of finished by the time I was, I don't know, 25, 26, something like that. And then I kind of didn't really, I'd kind of not properly written until I went back on this course.
It's one of the interesting things about writing, and this took me a long time to realize, is that
like, I don't know how you write, but like I'll sit down and I can write 5,000 words in an hour and a half, just like it just comes out. And then I won't write anything for like 5 days. And that used to concern me. And then I told people, like, now I realize I have to recover, right? Like,
yes.
like I sit down and do all this stuff and then I need some time away from it. And then I can go back and sift. And and so my writing process doesn't look like get up every day and write 1,500 words. I'm like, holy shit, that sounds unbearable.
Yes, I think you're right in terms of the more you output on one day, the more recovery time you need. That's very true. I mean, I kind of had a writing, well, when I was writing this book, I had a certain amount of time to try and get it done in that 3 months, that first draft. So I did have a word count goal every day. I was like, right, I need to do this, need to do this, need to do this. But yeah, it wasn't, you know, it wasn't in a kind of format that you'd recognize it as the finished book.
Yeah, so. I mean, it's hard. And so the book is all in her head, right? That's the first novel.
That's right.
So this is the other reason why I switched, like the podcast switched this year. I used to sort of do it informally and like, you know, once a month. And then the pandemic hit and every bookstore closed. And I was like, holy shit. How many writers do I know who have these books coming out that they've labored on forever? Yes. You sit in a room, right? And like literally you're waiting for it to be in a store so you can point to everybody like, that's what I've been doing.
Yes. I mean, mine, and that's it. Yeah, we go into lockdown, pandemic, which is, yes, it was awful. And, you know, it is something you've spent literally years of your life kind of doing. And I guess, you know, I could see it. I mean, my publishing date was the 3rd of April, so the UK went into lockdown on the kind of 23rd of March. So I could see it coming, and so could my editor. There wasn't anything we could do about it. So I went.
Does it make the train running over you any better?
Not really, no.
Seeing the train coming down the track is just dread.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I went to Suffolk in the UK with my editor. That's where they've kind of got a big factory warehouse, and I saw it printed. I saw it kind of roll off the presses.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, that was really cool. That was just before lockdown. So yeah, and then that was it. 2 weeks later, Zero shut. So
did your editor do that because she knew? Like, oh, you.
No, I think at that point we were kind of like, oh, it might be okay. It might be okay. You know, I think everyone was just in complete denial. So yes, it's gutting. But because my book came out in hardback. That was the one that came out on the 3rd of April, hardback and audiobook, and then it comes out in paperback in September. So. I guess hopefully, yes, exactly.
I mean, hopefully we'll be open by the 17th, so at least you can be like, hey, let's have a party for the paperback.
Yes. So I feel in some ways I'm fortunate because I still do have that kind of paperback kind of coming further down the line. And I think that also a lot of people have been incredibly supportive of debuts like yourself and, you know, other people on Twitter. You know, here in the UK, there's kind of famous authors that have been really generous and kind of retweeting stuff. And so a lot of my events, I couldn't do, obviously, physically. I had no events to go to, but a lot of stuff kind of moved online. And I think that was probably an advantage in some ways. I got to meet people and chat to people that I never would have had a chance to do otherwise. So it's not all bad.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I've said, you know, I've told people both on the show and off the show is that I actually think this is, in a weird way, outside of the horror of this thing devastating the planet, is that exactly what you said. Like, I wouldn't have been interviewing people from around the world, even though I love writers and I've been doing this forever. Like, this has given us a way to think about reaching audiences in a different way that authors never really, and publishers and publicists didn't really think about before. Absolutely. Right? It was all about being in a store. And now, like, I do Zoom happy hours with authors and I'll get 20 people that show up. Which, if you've ever done a reading in a store, you know, that's like 17 more people that show up.
Yes, absolutely.
And, you know, and it's everybody's in their house. We don't do readings. We literally just drink wine and chat. And like, I don't know like as a writer, I hate readings. Like I don't want to go to a bookstore and read to adults. I'm like, here's the book, go home and read it. I'm much more interested in having conversations with people that like the topic or whatever, whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah. I totally agree.
But we have in our head, like, we must do readings across the country. It's like, but really? Like, I could sit in my house, not leave my kids, keep writing and talk to people, from all over the place.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And, you can potentially reach a much larger audience online and you don't have to travel. So, so it's not.
I'm doing this in my PJs, so I feel like I'm living the day. But the book, not only do you get, and I have come to understand this is not uncommon, but you got a 2-book deal. Like you signed for a second book as well.
I did indeed. Yes. So that's the first draft is done and it's with my editor as we speak. So I imagine she'll be coming back in the next couple of weeks. I can live in blissful ignorance until then. Until she comes back with the edits.
It's the best book you've ever written until the edits.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
But this is sort of the thing that, this gets back to, and we just got a couple minutes left. Like, did you have, like, once the book, like when you signed the deal and was the first book done when you signed the deal?
Yes, it was done pretty much actually. It's Orion and my publishers, and they did come back with editing notes, but there was nothing really structural. So it was much more kind of like line and copy edits.
Sure.
But that's because I'd also done, I'd done an awful lot of kind of drafting and redrafting and rewriting. So I'm kind of expecting more edits this time round because the second book won't have been through, that kind of process.
Did you,
before.
So when you, knowing that and knowing everything it took to get you to the first book, when you signed the deal, did you immediately have I don't know if I can do this again?
Yes. Yeah. I think you get that initial kind of 2 days of just, ecstasy and excitement and everything. And then it was a bit like, oh my God, what am I going to do next
time? What have I done?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, yes, I think that I've kind of, it took me a while to get an idea for a second one. And I think that going forward, if I'm lucky enough to carry on doing this, then I would always like to have another idea before I'd finish the one that I was writing, because I think that kind of just relieves the stress slightly when you kind of have a complete blank page and it's like, right, okay, go novel 2. What am I going to write about? It's a bit kind of like, yes.
There's a science that's sort of colloquially called the paradox of choice. And essentially it says, if you give people ultimate choice, if you say, here's 100 things to choose from, people don't know how to do that. And so they'll choose the thing that they know, right? So they don't actually make a choice. They just go to the thing they already know. And I feel like sitting down in front of a blank page is the paradox of choice. Like, I can write anything. And you're like, oh, fuck.
Yes,
that's not a story. Anything is not a story.
Exactly.
And how do I chisel everything down into this one thing? And I think that. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think kind of other authors I talked to and things as well said it's a bit like apparently kind of getting a second album out if you're a band. You can't win either way, because if book 1 has been very successful, then there's a huge amount of pressure on you to kind of perform and do the same thing for the second one. And yet if the first one hasn't done well, then you're kind of thinking, oh my God, this one's got to do well because it's my last chance at it. So you're kind of stuck in the middle.
Yeah, it's why I refer to the sort of publishing cycle as a trauma. For exactly that reason, right? Like I was talking to a woman, Stephanie Story, who is a TV producer, and she's written, a book that's received that, turned into her first book turned into a movie, blah, 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 all that stuff.
Wow.
And that was what I asked. I was like, well, that feels like a trauma to me, because you're going to sit down the next time and immediately think, now they expect me to do this again.
Yes. And don't say that, Brad. Mine's been optioned for TV, and so I'm just trying not to think about that whilst I'm trying to do this one. So,
well, if it makes you feel better, my old boss used to call that a high-class problem. It was like, it got optioned for TV and you got to keep being successful. Well, that's a high class problem. Like,
That's very true.
yeah,
That
that's
is
why
true.
you can't go out into the cocktail parties and be like, guys, you don't know the stress I'm under. I'm so successful. How do I maintain that?
Yeah, but I think that's the real leveling thing actually with publishing is you're really only as good as the last thing that you've written. So, you may be a storming success and that's fantastic, but it's hard to keep doing that book after book after book. And yet it's also hopeful because if you didn't do it before, you might be able to do it next time.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, and I think it's probably good, I don't know about you, but when I was writing for Wired magazine when I was in my 20s, so millions of people, and during the dot-com boom, right, the biggest magazine writing about the biggest shit, I was 27, ill-equipped. I was on TV all the time, radio all the time, and my old colleagues and I sort of laughed because most of us left and don't do that anymore because it was we just weren't prepared for that level of public exposure. Yeah. And you don't understand the sort of anxiety and dread that comes with that.
Yes, absolutely.
And so being a little older and going through that, I think you think more about the career and less about the moment.
That is so true. And I think that I'm part of a kind of debut group of authors that are all coming out this year. Quite a few of us have been published in lockdown and the pandemic and everything. And I think those of us who are, that little bit older, you're just a bit more kind of, I don't know, resilient, I think, about it. And you kind of, you can learn to expect, good and bad things and panic less. So, yeah, I can imagine after you've had that, if you get that when you're 27, that's quite hard.
Yeah, and that's, I think, one of the sort of joys about, because it is it's a terrible situation, right? There's not really, we're all looking for silver linings in this sort of the bookstores closing and all that stuff. But I do feel like at the end of the day, the writing world is going to be better for this because of this, just because I think there's been such a universal, hey, we really need to think about what this means. And we need to think about the publishing industry and how do we support each other. And it is a thing that I have not seen in my professional life, authors and writers and publishers and everybody sort of coming together.
Yeah, I hope so. I think there has been a lot more of that, and publishers, kind of different publishing houses cooperating, and things like that, which has been lovely. So, and apparently people are reading more because obviously in lockdown there's only a certain number of things that you can do. So that's been good. But it would be nice to see the bookshops open again.
Right. And we'll leave it here because this is the advice that I've given to everybody. You better be planning your book release party right now and the day that we're allowed to open. And I tell people, you throw whatever goddamn party you want to throw. If you want people in black tie and cocktail, do that for two reasons. One, you sat in a house for 20 something years, right? This is a thing to be celebrated. But two, everybody's going to want a good party when it's done. And you'll never get that many people at a book release except for the day after quarantine when everybody will show up.
That is very, very true. Yes.
So don't wait. Get on that party planning right now.
Yeah, I'll have to do it for the paperback, I think. As long as we're allowed in the shop by then that'd be
great. But here's the thing, it doesn't even have to, I don't even feel like it needs to coincide with the thing coming out because the book's already out, right?
That's true.
I just mean to have the party, find a bookstore, find an independent bookstore that needs some traffic and say, hey, I'm going to bring in 50 people and throw a party. I promise you it'll be the best time you ever had.
Yeah, that's true. Yes.
Well, it was great chatting with you today. The book is called All in Her Head, and it is out now. The paperback's coming out in September, right? And the audiobook's out now as well, correct?
That's right, yes.
So you can get it in all of the forms anywhere.
You can.
You have a great day. It was great chatting with you.
Thanks ever so much for having me, Brad. That was lovely. Really nice talking to you.
Well, there you have it. That was Nikki Smith. She is utterly charming. Her book, All in Her Head, is deeply dark. Totally worth the read. You should go pick that up right now. It's British, so if you're in America, I had to go to Waterstones to get it, so you can't go through Amazon. It's not out here yet. If you're anywhere else but here, it's very easy to get. I will say it showed up very quickly when I bought it, so don't let the British thing concern you, Americans. Again, we are now part of the Solid Listen Podcast Network, but that doesn't change the fact that it still helps us if you go leave a review. If you liked what you heard, wherever you listen to podcasts, please go leave a written review. And go to the website. You can see all of the happy hours and all of the things that we do. Love to have you sign up for all of that stuff. We're looking forward to the next few weeks. We are going to take a week off right before we launch just to make sure that we have everything in order. Really happy to have Stephanie on board. Really happy to be working with Nicole again. Really looking forward to working with Molly as we do all this stuff. And I hope you will spread the word for us because we think that we got a good thing going here. And we enjoy the conversations that we have with everybody. We are also in a global pandemic, so please continue to take care of yourselves. Listen to scientists. Wear masks. Wash your hands. Take care of your emotional health. Max the dog right now is very annoyed that I'm having this conversation because we went on a long hike today, and he just wants to sleep. He is socially distancing from me, which is what you should do as well. Not necessarily just from me, from everybody. And until next time, I will see you around the internet.
The Violet Hour presents
Just ignore it. Accept his gift.
It's in your head. There's no one here. No. Not again.
And then there's sacrifice.
The Elmwood Strain, a horror podcast by Violet Hour Media. Listen every Monday beginning January 18th. Subscribe for free wherever you listen to podcasts.